Hey everyone, happy Friday, June 8th, 2018. I am John Lorden, and this is your BrainScratch for the week. Hope you all had a nice week out there. I'm going to change things up on today's episode. We're doing what I consider a fringe episode, something we haven't done in a while. We've definitely been really focusing on the true crime element lately. Every now and then I like to do a fringe episode to kind of lighten things on the channel a bit. And of course, especially coming off last week's case and the update I released today on the Lucas Hernandez case, I think that we could use just a little bit of a change of pace. So we're looking to the stars again. I do that occasionally. We're going to look for some UFOs. Are we going to find anything? Well, if you've been following my track record with looking into these types of cases, it's not very strong. Typically, it winds up that one person in particular is pushing a story, and those facts are very hard to try to prove or disprove, and ultimately you just wind up at a loss to really be able to get anywhere in these cases. But this one might be a little different. Some people refer to this as Pennsylvania's Roswell. That should mean that there's a lot to crack into here, right? Let me give a big thank you to Karen for suggesting looking into today's case. And let's go ahead and get started with an old-timey news article from December 10th, 1965, a paper called The Spokesman. UFO starts many fires. Cleveland, Ohio. A brilliant fireball flashed across the sky over Lake Erie near dusk, and particles of the unidentified object apparently were the cause of fires at scattered points in Ohio and Pennsylvania. The bright flash was seen in Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. A small fire in woods just outside Kecksburg in southwest Pennsylvania also was under investigation. Federal Aviation Agency spokesmen say it probably was a meteor. And we've certainly heard that excuse before. We can see here on the Wayback Machine, we also have the Tribune Review and their title, Army Ropes Off Area, Unidentified Flying Object Falls Near Kecksburg. So certainly some real press around this. We can certainly say something seemed to happen in Kecksburg. Although, believe it or not, some people actually debate if anything happened, and then other people debate what actually happened. Let's go ahead and start at Wikipedia just to cover some of the basics of this story. And if you are wondering, this is not a giant acorn, but this is a mock-up of what they believe the spaceship looked like. This was actually done for an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and they left the prop behind, and the town has now decided to host the prop up on a giant pole. I'm pretty sure it's been repainted. I don't know why they repainted it that color. I watched the episode of Unsolved Mysteries. It seemed to be silver before, and by people's description, metallic silver seems to be kind of the description they say. Some of them have said copper, so maybe that's the color they're going for. I don't know that it's really coming across well in this picture, but apparently you can still go to Kecksburg and see the UFO from Unsolved Mysteries there. The Kecksburg UFO incident occurred on December 9th, 1965 at Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, United States. A large, brilliant fireball was seen by thousands in at least 6 U.S. states and Ontario, Canada. It streaked over the Detroit, Michigan, Windsor, Canada area, reportedly dropped hot metal debris over Michigan and northern Ohio, starting some grass fires, and caused sonic booms in the Pittsburgh metropolitan area. Eyewitnesses in the small village of Kecksburg, about 30 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, claimed something crashed in the woods. Local volunteer fire department members reported finding an object in the shape of an acorn and about as large as a Volkswagen Beetle. Writing resembling Egyptian hieroglyphs was also said to be on a band around the base of the object. Witnesses further reported that intense military presence, most notably the United States Army, secured the area, ordered civilians out, and then removed an object on a flatbed truck. The military claimed they searched the woods and found absolutely nothing. So that is a description of what these markings are around the perimeter. These are the supposed hieroglyphs. I have to say that I've obviously looked into several sources on this case, and people keep saying that they looked like Egyptian hieroglyphs or hieroglyphics. And I believe it got traced back to the source of one of the actual firefighters, and it was his assessment that writing seemed to be like old Egyptian writing, like hieroglyphs or hieroglyphics. So what occurred to me is he also gave more of an explanation about the writing, and other people gave an explanation about the writing too. Some of them said it seemed like the writing was backwards. And in particular, he said that he saw, I believe, a star and several lines, which to me doesn't necessarily, I don't know if I would really describe that as Egyptian. The things that I'm hearing described, I'm honestly wondering if it's more Russian writing. And as we get into this, you're going to see there might be a reason that maybe they were seeing Russian writing on this item. Now, one of the people that has been a big figure in terms of speaking about this case. Well, first of all, of course, there's this man, and it's funny because they don't even have his name down here, but here we go. His name is Stan Gordon. He is kind of the local researcher that has been working on this case ever since it happened. But one of the key people in terms of telling this story is Jim Romansky, and he is one of the volunteer firefighters that supposedly got very close to this object. So over at Trib Live, let's go ahead and jump into what he says that he saw. Jim Romansky waited 20 years before telling anyone that he was face-to-face with a UFO that crashed in the woods outside Kecksburg on December 9th, 1965. Quote, "I didn't want to be a candidate for the hospital down the road," said Romansky, who was 18, and he was one of the first firefighters on the scene. "If a flying saucer lands in my backyard and little green men come out, I won't even tell my neighbor," said Romansky, who was ridiculed by some Kecksburg residents who didn't believe anything happened that night. "Half the town believes the UFO story, the other half doesn't," he said. For half a century, that debate has split the town, and not just the town. If you look online, we're just going to be getting a sample of it with what I'm looking through today, but there is definitely a big split of opinion in terms of what has gone on here. So what happened that night? The siren went off that cold, wet night in December. He took off running the 200 yards from his house to the fire hall and jumped on a truck that was headed out. "We have a call at Kecksburg," he was told. "Downed aircraft somewhere on the ridge." Once there, his crew joined firefighters from a number of other companies. "I expected to see a smashed up airplane or wings," he said. "There was nothing like that. I saw this huge piece of metal. There was no crater. It plowed right into the ground and left a trail. The metal object, large enough for a man to stand in, had no windows or doors and included what Romansky described as hieroglyphics on the side. As about 8 or 9 firefighters looked it over, 2 men in trench coats came over the hill. 'You're ordered out of the area,' one of the men said. 'It is quarantined.' In my mind, in my heart, I know what I saw," Romansky said. "I feel that I'm a part of history," he said. "It's something major. A UFO crashed in Kecksburg." And I really wanted to include that last point because when I'm listening to people's personal accounts here, I have to wonder, is there something that is driving them or motivating them to hold on to that particular story or to have romanticized the story in any way at all? And that's the closest thing that I get to this guy having some reason, is just that he considers this a part of history. It's a UFO that crashed in his area, and he was one of the first people to actually get to it, and he was one of the few people to actually see it. Now, remember, according to the Wikipedia story, a flatbed army truck came and picked it up. We have one person that says that they saw it on the army truck before it was covered. There are many people that say they saw the flatbed army truck driving out with the object covered. So basically, in most of those cases, they can just confirm the shape of it. What's interesting to me about his description is that he's talking about it looking metallic. And if you look at vehicles that have re-entered through the atmosphere, they don't always look metallic. There's a lot of burning and charring that goes on with those materials, and they can look pretty dark. And considering that they're out there at night, I've seen several interviews with him. He's talking about they're using flashlights to get around out there. I'm just surprised that that's the description that's coming out of this thing, especially if we consider that it traveled into our atmosphere from outer space. There should have been some significant heat that it dealt with. There should have been some charring, I would imagine, on the outside. We've heard from the news stories that obviously pieces of it were falling off and they were burning pieces. Was that maybe some type of protective covering for this item and it protected the metallic inside? I don't know. So if you do look into this case, and I'm going to have so many sources down below to get you started, but there are many, many more, you are likely going to run into Jim's testimony here, maybe several different interviews with him. But this really kind of gets the basics of it. Personally, when I'm watching him be interviewed about it, I don't get a vibe off him like he's storytelling. I haven't heard any variations in his version of the story. It seems to be relatively consistent every time I hear him say it. I don't know. I don't get the feeling that he's lying. And you guys know I don't really like playing human lie detector, but unfortunately, in a case like this, we don't have anything to point to in terms of proof, especially if the government, if the armed forces, if all these different departments that might have descended on this town and removed this item aren't willing to speak about it. We just have nothing to press up against what he's saying and to test it to see if it's really true or not. But in terms of the story actually happening, we get another interesting spin here at a blog called notfakenews.biz, but it's actually written by journalist Bob Gaddy, who was also on the scene. 52 years ago, I walked into the Greensburg Tribune Review newsroom one evening after covering a local government meeting, and my editor put his arm around my shoulders and said, "Bob, I've got the story of the century for you." I thought he was kidding, or at least planning to send me on a rookie reporter's snipe hunt. "Oh yeah? And what is that?" I asked. "There's been a report that an unidentified flying object landed somewhere near Kecksburg. I want you to go out there and get the story. I'm serious," he said. "Get going." So I jumped in my car and drove out to the tiny farm community of Kecksburg that is now part of UFO lore. When I went to the scene that night, I and other reporters were denied access to the reported landing site by armed Army personnel. There was a report that something with blue flashing lights landed, breaking off some tree branches on the way down, but that was denied by every official source we could talk to. From here, his blog goes into referencing some other videos about this case, quite honestly, videos that don't seem to be there anymore, and then a film that is being made about this case, but it's a fictional film, which I'm not even sure why he's trying to promote. But what I find interesting is, like I was telling you previously about Jim Romansky, I have seen Bob Gaddy also interviewed, and I am finding variations in his story. There is a documentary that was made of all this by this guy, Stan Gordon, the primary researcher that's been working on this for practically his whole life. And in that documentary, Bob Gaddy kind of retells this story. And in that version of the story, he is not denied access to the site by Army personnel. He's actually talking to a state trooper. In terms of that human lie detector thing or storytelling component, for some reason, Bob Gaddy doesn't give me a good feeling. That's about as good as I could put it, guys. I don't, obviously, once again, we're in a case where we can't really prove that he's being incorrect or that he noticed things wrong or something like that. It's just based specifically on what he's saying here and comparing that to an interview that he has done, probably, at least 20, 25 years before he wrote this article. I'm finding variations that I think are pretty serious. In particular, the fact that he doesn't really seem to have encountered or interacted with any Army personnel on the site here, at least according to what he said in the documentary. Another interesting thing that came out of Stan Gordon's documentary is a possible explanation for the flashing lights. And I have seen in a few different places where people are talking about they were looking down into this area where they saw this item go down, and they were noticing that there was these very bright strobing flashes. And in Stan's documentary, he actually says that they have traced that to some kids that heard what was going on. Like apparently they were listening to the radio, heard all this ruckus was going on, and they took a flash bulb from a camera down to that area, and they were just messing with people. They were walking around the woods and just kind of setting off the flash bulb, which kind of lines up with the explanation of one of the witnesses who was talking about there being a time interval, because flash bulbs, especially back then, would take a certain amount of time before they would re-energize enough for you to be able to kick them off again. So kind of interesting that even Stan's own research is pointing out that there was at least a prank being played by some kids in terms of the light that was happening down there. Another interesting thing is the firefighters did not talk about any type of light source emanating from it or any type of lighting that's on the exterior of it, nothing like that. They also described that the exterior of it doesn't seem to have any mechanisms of propulsion, doesn't have any wings, any way to really be able to change direction. And that's probably one of the more interesting angles on this case is I keep hearing, especially in information that Stan's presenting, that it changed direction several times before it landed there. And I don't know generally if reentry vehicles that we have made, capsules where astronauts come back down to Earth and all that, I don't know if they're really able to change direction, in particular in the way that they're talking about here. I mean, they're really making it sound like this thing was buzzing around almost like an airplane and decides to make a right, decides to make a left. I don't know enough about reentry capsules to know about that, but we can learn a little bit more about Stan Gordon here at his own website, stangordon.info. Stan Gordon was trained as an electronics technician who specialized in radio communications. He worked in the advanced consumer electronics sales field for over 40 years. I don't know what that means necessarily. Maybe electronics for industrial use or something along those lines. Stan has lived in Greensburg, Pennsylvania all his life. Gordon began his interest in the UFO subject and other strange incidents at the age of 10 in 1959. He began in the field investigations of UFOs and other mysterious events in 1965 and is the primary investigator of the December 9th, 1965 UFO crash recovery incident that occurred near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. So if we look at the banner for his website, just worth noting, I think that's an outer space background, but Bigfoot is in space. So just in terms of his belief structure, I believe, yes, he certainly believes in UFOs. He's certainly probably looking for information to support these things. His documentary that he did on this, the interviews are actually really, really good. In terms of him presenting it, it's probably the weak spot of the documentary. It's just, he's not the most engaging guy on camera. Not everyone can be, I get that. But the interviews are really interesting because you have a significant number of people that are kind of touching different aspects of what's going on here. And when you're watching all these people, just the sheer number of people that are giving information on this makes it fairly clear that it's like, okay, obviously something happened in this area. There are just far too many people that witnessed this thing flying through the sky. There are far too many people that are saying, they received phone calls from government officials. People were asking directions on how to get there. People had their homes or their farm taken over to be used as a command post. The volunteer fire department was taken over to be used as a command post. There's way too many people talking about all that. I have not seen a lot of critics saying that didn't necessarily happen, that aspect of the military coming out there didn't necessarily happen. It'd be very interesting to see a documentary of maybe the other half of the people that live in that area that supposedly don't believe that this was anything significant or don't believe that it even happened, just to see what they say about all that information that's out there, because the sheer volume of it is serious. I mean, it's just there's a lot of people talking about different aspects of this case. So what are some theories here? What could this possibly be? Okay, of course, when you have people that have beliefs in extraterrestrials, they're going to bring that up, particularly in a case like this. What if this was a legit UFO? What if this was some type of alien spacecraft? Here at Atlas Obscura, they have a paragraph that really throws together most of the popular theories going on here. The intrigue and conflicting accounts surrounding the Kecksburg incident have predictably spawned a number of theories. One of the most popular, of course, being that it was an alien spacecraft that landed in the woods that afternoon. Others posit that the object was a piece from a Russian satellite, in particular the spacecraft Cosmos 96, which re-entered Earth's atmosphere that same day following a failed attempt to reach Venus, a misfired missile, or a time-traveling Nazi aircraft. No, I'm not kidding. There are theories that this is possibly a time-traveling Nazi aircraft. As a matter of fact, there is a whole episode on the History Channel called In Search of Aliens, Season 1, Episode 2. I'm going to have the link down below. Many of you guys might recognize this guy. He's in the Ancient Aliens series pretty frequently. Giorgio, can't remember his last name, but I just remember he's the guy that usually has really crazy hair and way too much blush on. But I've watched the whole episode of In Search of Aliens. The last 10 minutes kind of features the Kecksburg story, and that's primarily why I wanted to watch it. But you know how these things are. It's a lot of theorizing. It's anytime I hear him say some people believe, I just get this question in my head about how many people are we talking about, Giorgio? Or are we talking about like 10 people? I mean, because right when he says some people believe, we usually hear some kind of really extreme, strange belief, and then the rest of the episode is going in the direction of trying to chase that down. So In Search of Aliens definitely doesn't do anything different with the Ancient Aliens formula in that regard. But if you do want to hear more about the Nazi time machine theory, that's where you can check it out. But remember earlier I was saying in terms of the hieroglyphics that were around the perimeter of this thing, that maybe that could have been Russian. Cosmos 96. So this is over at MUFON, which Mutual UFO Network, is that the... Yeah, Mutual UFO Network, established in 1969. Obviously, this is what you would consider a UFO believer site. If you look through the board of directors, you'll see that many of them are people that have had some type of experience personally. But let's get some more information from them about Cosmos 96. There had been some speculation that the object in the Kecksburg incident may have been debris from Cosmos 96, a Soviet satellite. Cosmos 96 had a bell or acorn-like shape similar to the object reported by eyewitnesses, though much smaller than witnesses reported. However, in a 1991 report, U.S. Space Command concluded that Cosmos 96 crashed in Canada at 3:18 a.m. on December 9th, 1965, about 13 hours before the fireball thought to be the Kecksburg object undergoing reentry was recorded at 4:45 p.m. In addition, in a 2003 interview, Chief Scientist for Orbital Debris at the NASA Johnson Space Center, Nicholas L. Johnson, stated, "I can tell you categorically that there is no way that any debris from Cosmos 96 could have landed in Pennsylvania anywhere around 4:45 p.m. So I'm a little bothered by how close this is happening in terms of time. We're talking a 13-hour difference between them officially concluding, yes, we know that a piece of Cosmos 96 certainly did crash in Canada, which is just north of, I mean, it depends what part of Canada, I suppose, but Canada is definitely north of Kecksburg. And then 13 hours later, we have another significant piece of debris falling from outer space, and getting that close, it'd be one thing to me if it was something that landed on the other side of the Earth or something like that. And then thinking about the possibility of the time frame, well, maybe, we'd have to look at statistically how many times objects fall to the Earth on a daily basis and try to figure out. But we're talking about geographically relative areas, two significant crashes within a 13-hour period. And I understand what he's trying to say. I mean, the rest of the quote is from the chief scientist of orbital debris, is that it's an absolute. Orbital mechanics are very strict. And I do understand that. If something is coming in through re-entering the atmosphere, it's going to come at a certain rate. It's going to fall in a certain way. It's going to land in generally a predictable location. I mean, that's how we're able to recover people and bring things in ourselves. But I don't know. There's something about the time frame here that really, really bothers me. It seems just much, much too close. And then when you take a look at this, which is the Cosmos 96 satellite, check out the shape of this thing. Let me see if I can increase the size a little bit. Check that out. And let's just compare that. I don't know, guys. Sure looks like an acorn shape to me, or as some people have called it, a bell. Some people even said specifically the Liberty Bell. There's a lot of other things on the exterior of it. I wonder if those would have burned up on reentry or fallen off, and maybe those are part of the explanation for the other fires that were started in the different states. Because by the firefighter's description, the item that he saw was fairly smooth. And obviously, if you look at this thing, it doesn't look very smooth. But the overall shape of it, that is certainly an acorn shape. I could see if that was laying on its side, and who knows, maybe one side of this is smooth and the side that had all these devices on it could have been the bottom side that was actually dug into the ground a little bit. I don't know, but this really strikes me. And then considering writing that they couldn't recognize kind of around the band of it, I don't know. I get stuck on this one. I think this theory has something to it. In 2005, NASA changes the story to Russian satellite. In December of 2005, just before the 40th anniversary of the crash, NASA released a statement to the effect that they had examined metallic fragments from the object and now claimed it was from a re-entering Russian satellite. The spokesman further claimed that the related records had been misplaced, according to an Associated Press story. The object appeared to be a Russian satellite that re-entered the atmosphere and broke up. NASA experts studied fragments from the object, but records of what they found were lost in the 1990s. And this goes on to describe lawsuits, people trying to sue NASA, trying to force them to look for these records, and NASA just not being able to find these records no matter what they do. Pretty interesting read. You might want to check it out. Just keep in mind, MUFON is going to be from the believer perspective. And obviously, there is the other perspective. So let's head to a blog called Bad UFOs and see what they think. What, if anything, crashed at Kecksburg that night? The reality is that a brilliant fireball meteor was widely seen across the eastern U.S. and Canada at about 4:42 p.m. on December 9th, 1965, and studied extensively by scientists. Several scientific papers were published about it in astronomical journals. The supposed crashing UFO reported from Kecksburg matches exactly with the Great Fireball in time and in direction. And they have several sources. It gets a little bit nerdy in here, so we're not going to dive into that too much. But of course, I will have this in the sources down below so you can come and take a look at this if that's your thing, if you want to dive into the nerdy aspect of it as well. Pretty interesting to me that we're talking about having what appears to be a natural phenomenon that is scientifically published and being written about. Does that line up with the military presence that is going on in this particular area, which I don't really think we can deny? There is just far too much information out there about the military presence appearing in this area. You literally just have witness after witness after witness after witness that's coming forward talking about different aspects of that military presence. Would that have happened if it was just some type of natural meteor that had fallen to Earth or something like that? I don't know. I'm kind of wondering about that. And over at thepostgazette.com, we get a really interesting twist because we have some guys from MUFON. They come to a conclusion that might actually surprise you. Two Westmoreland County researchers have put forth a theory that they say explains it. The unidentified flying object that came down December 9th, 1965, they say, was a General Electric Mark II reentry vehicle that had been launched by the Air Force as a spy satellite, but fell out of orbit. That would certainly make the military presence make sense. Their research put forth in a report with the title, "Has a Top 5 UFO Case Been Solved?" suggests the vehicle was launched from Johnston Island in the Pacific 2 days earlier as part of America's top secret program for spying on the Soviet Union from space. And it did take some doing, but I found their research paper. I also found a Minnesota chapter of MUFON that has a bit of a rebuttal to their research paper as well. So I'm going to include both of those links down below. Essentially, the rebuttal is saying that the distance might have been too much for them to be right about it being part of Program 437, particularly with them saying that this is a direct ascent weapon, essentially not a weapon that would go all the way into atmosphere and then, or all the way into orbit and then fall out of orbit at some point, but shoot from one location directly to another. That's just a really brief way of trying to explain that. But if you guys want to get into the nerdiness there, I've got it there for you. We also get another interesting discrepancy noted in this article. Former Post-Gazette reporter Ernie Hoffman, 76, of Hempfield, was working the night shift in Greensburg when he and a photographer were sent to the scene. Mr. Hoffman arrived in time to see military men taking an object away on the back of a flatbed truck. But his account differs from some of the other witness recollections. It was not a 10 to 12 foot object, he recalled. It was small, the size of 2 suitcases. Jerry Betters, a Pittsburgh jazz vocalist who died in 2007, told investigators it was larger than that. He also appeared in the documentary that I will have a link to down below, the documentary made by Stan Gordon here. But I've actually frozen it on a picture that Jerry drew of the item. And as you can see, in terms of size, yeah, we're definitely looking at 12 feet or higher, probably 15 feet if he's got the scale of the truck right. He also noted there was a white star on the door of the truck, so that's why you can see that in the photo. But see, we've got that kind of acorn shape going on here, but quite honestly, the way that his finishes off at the bottom looks much more like a traditional space capsule, like something that, you know, like a toy that I would have had in the 80s or something like that. It doesn't quite have the bulbous acorn shape that some of the others were describing. Now, I mentioned that these guys are theorizing that it is a Mark II reentry vehicle. Well, what does that look like? It looks like this. Here is a Mark II reentry vehicle. When we take a look at that and compare that particularly to Jerry Better's picture here, I don't know, guys. I think that is a pretty good match. And keep in mind, Jerry Betters says that he witnessed this before the tarp was on it. That's why he's got all this this physical description that he's able to draw. So maybe it wasn't Russian after all. I'm not sure. So the GE Mark II reentry vehicle was used in the nose cone of the Thor, Atlas, and Jupiter rockets of the early 1960s. So in terms of the time frame, we're definitely in the right ballpark there. The size and shape appear similar to the Kecksburg UFO. Other points made by Mr. Eichler and Mr. Venture, those are the two guys that wrote this paper, include point number 1, the GE vehicle had 4 control jets, which would explain the controlled turning descent that witnesses described. Number 2, one of the metals in its construction was copper, which would explain the green flames people saw. It would also explain that some people actually described it as being coppered colored. 3, photos of the reentry vehicle seem to show markings that might have seemed foreign to civilian observers. The other thing I'm wondering there is, even if it was written in English, this thing, if it did just fall through the atmosphere, could some of the lettering have burnt off? Could it have obstructed some of the detail of the lettering in some way where people thought that it was different characters? Another significant thing we believe is that this thing had a nuclear or atomic generator in it, Mr. Venture said. And when that hit, they had to get it out of Kecksburg before they had a radiation leak. That's why they were there so quickly. That's why there were guys in radiation suits with a lead box going into the woods. They had to get that and make sure it was not leaking before they drove it out to the turnpike. I heard some of the description about the suits that showed up and some type of 5-foot white box. They actually specifically recreated that in the Unsolved Mysteries episode. So it does seem like if you have people walking around in those types of suits, they were worried about some type of contamination. Other witnesses were talking about people walking around with Geiger counters or Geiger meters as well. So it seems like radiation was a concern around this. We need confirmation from NASA or the Air Force. We've left messages, but we're not getting any phone calls back. And of course, around all this, well, you've got to be able to make some money, right? Each July, the Earthlings in Kecksburg host a UFO festival where they have a lot of fun and raise a little money for the volunteer fire department. The weekend festival is like any other small town summer fair with games, music, races, hot dog eating contests, and such until Sunday when they squeeze more than 300 people into the hall for the UFO conference. Witnesses, investigators, and experts share their recollections and their theories. So if you're interested, maybe you want to head to the Pennsylvania, Roswell, Kecksburg in July and be a part of all that. So in the links below, as I mentioned, the Kecksburg UFO Crash documentary will be down there. Of course, all the links that we've looked at here, plus some more of those kind of research papers that I was telling you about. Here, I was looking at Reentry Capsules, and I have to say that this is actually a Chinese reentry capsule, but look at that shape. Certainly looks like an acorn to me. And if you just look at just general pictures of reentry capsules, they're all kind of that same teardrop shape, which I think is for a reason, because the way that they come down, you want the weight to kind of be driving the bottom of it and then the aerodynamic angle around up near the top. But from what I see in terms of US capsules, they're more in this kind of triangular, almost pyramid shape. The Russian ones and the Chinese ones seem to have this very close to an acorn specific shape. So just another consideration to throw at you guys with all this. I'm also going to have the Unsolved Mysteries in the links below, as well as, of course, hey, is it Nazi time travelers? If you guys want to learn more about that, check out the In Search of Aliens history link down below. That's it, guys. Did we find aliens this time? I don't know. Really doesn't seem like it. I think we're looking at one of two possibilities. Either it is a U.S. craft that came down unexpectedly, and there's different variations in that, of course. Could it have been a spy satellite? Could it have been some kind of test rocket that malfunctioned or something along those lines? Could it have been something that the U.S. was so embarrassed by that, could have been potentially a risk to the area where it fell and they just had to cover it up? I think that we really have to consider that. Outside of that, could it have been a piece of a Russian satellite? And is there some reason why we would have covered that up? Would we have wanted to take in it? Keep in mind, this is in 65. We're right in the middle of the space race. Is there some angle where we thought maybe we could learn something by collecting this and hiding it? In the documentary, it notes that would be a violation of a NATO agreement where basically we have an agreement with other countries where if a piece of their property from space falls on our property, we still get it back to them. So I'm not really sure if that's the case here, or do you guys think that I'm completely missing it? And hey, ET likes to come. Actually, when you think about the shape of ET's spacecraft, yeah, I guess it kind of has that same shape as well. I don't know, guys. This is where I turn it over to you. Let's talk about it in the comments below. Hope you liked this fringe episode of BrainScratch, a little different from the norm. I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me on this episode. Come back to the Lord and Arts channel on Monday. We're going to do it all again. I've got a really interesting Johnny Vlogs lined up for you guys. Really interesting question about the Lyle Stevick case and maybe some input from an expert on that case. Hope you guys will check it out. Have a great weekend, and I hope to see you there.